Have you ever wondered what you would do if you witnessed a crime? If you heard a scream for help piercing the silence of the night? We all like to believe we would be the hero, the one who steps in, the one who makes a difference. But what if I told you that the more people who witness an emergency, the less likely it is that anyone will help? This isn't a cynical opinion. It's a chilling psychological phenomenon, one that played out in the most brutal way imaginable on a cold March night in Queens, New York, leaving a young woman to die alone while her neighbors listened from the safety of their homes. This is the story of a murder that forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth about ourselves. Our story begins in the early morning hours of March 13, 1964, in the quiet, respectable neighborhood of Kew Gardens. Catherine "Kitty" Genovese, a vibrant 28-year-old bar manager, was returning home from her late-night shift. She parked her red Fiat about 100 feet from her apartment door, a familiar routine she had done countless times before. But on this night, the familiar shadows of her seemingly safe neighborhood concealed a predator. As she walked towards her building, a man emerged from the darkness, a man whose actions would not only end her life, but also ignite a firestorm of controversy and psychological inquiry that continues to this day. The man was Winston Moseley, a 29-year-old business machine operator, a husband, and a father of two. To the outside world, he was unremarkable, another face in the bustling metropolis of New York City. But beneath this veneer of normalcy lurked a violent predator. That night, Moseley was prowling the streets, armed with a hunting knife, searching for a victim. His path tragically intersected with Kitty's in a cruel twist of fate. He had no personal connection to her. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, a random target for his malevolent desires. His subsequent attack would be a study in brutality, made all the more horrifying by the audience it attracted. The initial assault was swift and savage. Moseley lunged at Kitty, stabbing her in the back twice. Her terrified screams shattered the pre-dawn stillness, cries of, "Oh my God, he stabbed me! Help me!" echoing through the courtyards of the surrounding apartment buildings. Lights flickered on in several windows as residents were jolted from their sleep. One man, Robert Moser, shouted from his window, "Let that girl alone!" His voice was enough to momentarily startle Moseley, who retreated into the shadows, leaving a wounded and bleeding Kitty to struggle towards her apartment building, a beacon of hope that was tragically just out of reach. In the moments that followed, a strange and unsettling silence fell over Kew Gardens. Kitty, injured but still alive, managed to stagger to her feet and make her way around the corner of the building, toward a back entrance. The witnesses who had been drawn to their windows by her screams saw the attacker leave, and assuming the danger had passed, went back to their beds. No one called the police. This crucial window of opportunity, a chance to save a life, was lost in a collective wave of inaction, a shared delusion that someone else would surely handle the situation. The responsibility to act diffused into the night air, as thin and insubstantial as the morning mist. The investigation began with a sense of bewilderment. When police finally arrived, summoned by a belated call, they found a crime scene that was both horrifying and perplexing. The initial belief was that this was a robbery gone wrong, a common enough occurrence in the city. But as detectives from the 102nd Precinct, led by Lieutenant Bernard Jacobs, began canvassing the neighborhood, a far more disturbing picture started to emerge. They spoke to resident after resident, and a pattern of denial and apathy became chillingly clear. People had heard the screams, they had seen the attack, yet their doors remained locked, their phones silent. The detectives were stumped. How could a prolonged, public attack go unreported? The crime scene itself told a gruesome story, with bloodstains marking the path of Kitty's desperate struggle. But the human element was the most baffling. The witnesses weren't hardened criminals or indifferent city dwellers. They were ordinary people, families, individuals living in a supposedly close-knit community. Their failure to intervene was a mystery in itself, a psychological riddle that overshadowed the search for the physical perpetrator. The question wasn't just who killed Kitty Genovese, but why had so many people let it happen? As the investigation deepened, the full, horrifying extent of the public's inaction came to light. A New York Times article, published 2 weeks after the murder, dropped a bombshell on the city and the nation. It reported that 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens in Queens had watched a killer stalk and stab a woman in 3 separate attacks over a period of 35 minutes. The story, which would later be found to contain some embellishments, nevertheless captured the terrifying essence of the event and sent shockwaves through the public consciousness. The image of 38 silent witnesses became a powerful and enduring symbol of urban apathy. The police were initially skeptical of the 38 witnesses' claim, and subsequent investigations have shown that the number was likely an exaggeration. However, the core truth remained undeniable. A significant number of people were aware of Kitty's distress and did nothing. The excuses they offered were varied and unsettling. Some claimed they thought it was a lover's quarrel. Others said they didn't want to get involved. A few admitted they were simply afraid. This collection of rationalizations painted a grim picture of a society where personal safety trumped civic duty, where the bonds of community had frayed to the point of non-existence. The case took on a life of its own, becoming a media sensation. The story of the 38 silent witnesses was repeated in newspapers, on television, and in conversations across the country. It tapped into a growing fear of urban decay and the anonymity of city life. Pundits and everyday citizens alike debated the moral failings of the Kew Gardens residents. The case became a national Rorschach test, reflecting anxieties about crime, community, and the very nature of human responsibility. The narrative was set. A young woman had been brutally murdered while her neighbors, in their silent complicity, had allowed it to happen. The breakthrough in the case came not from a witness's belated pang of conscience, but from a piece of old-fashioned police work. A few days after the murder, a neighbor of Kitty's reported that his television set had been stolen. The investigating officers, noting the proximity to the murder scene, decided to look for connections. They learned of a man who had been seen carrying a television in the area. This man was Winston Moseley. The lead was tenuous, but in a case with no other viable suspects, it was a thread they had to pull. When the police brought Moseley in for questioning, he quickly confessed, not only to the theft of the television, but also to the murder of Kitty Genovese. His confession was chilling in its lack of remorse. He recounted the events of that night with a cold, detached precision, describing how he had stalked Kitty, attacked her, and then returned to finish the job when he realized no one was coming to her aid. His matter-of-fact admission was a horrifying confirmation of the witnesses' inaction. Their silence had not only failed to save Kitty, it had emboldened her killer. Moseley's confession also revealed other shocking crimes. He admitted to 2 other murders, numerous burglaries, and a sexual assault. He was a serial predator who had been operating under the radar, his respectable family life a carefully constructed facade. The man who had seemed so ordinary was, in fact, a monster hiding in plain sight. His capture brought a sense of relief, but it did little to answer the larger, more troubling questions raised by the case. The who had been found, but the why of the witnesses' silence remained a haunting enigma. The trial of Winston Moseley was a media spectacle. The prosecution laid out the brutal details of the crime, emphasizing the prolonged nature of the attack and the numerous opportunities for intervention. Moseley's defense team attempted an insanity plea, but his calm and coherent confession made it a difficult argument to sustain. The jury, after a short deliberation, found him guilty of murder. The judge, in sentencing him to death, condemned not only Moseley's actions but also the apathy of the witnesses, calling their inaction a disgrace. The aftermath of the trial saw a period of intense soul-searching. The residents of Kew Gardens became reluctant symbols of a national malaise. They were ostracized, their neighborhood forever tainted by the events of that night. The media portrayed them as cold and unfeeling, a characterization that many of them would spend the rest of their lives trying to escape. The case had a profound and lasting impact on the community, creating a legacy of shame and notoriety that would be difficult to shake. The Kitty Genovese case had a far-reaching legacy that extended far beyond the streets of Kew Gardens. It spurred a wave of research in the field of social psychology, leading to the development of the Bystander Effect, also known as Genovese syndrome. Psychologists Bibb Latané and John Darley conducted a series of groundbreaking experiments to understand why people are less likely to help in an emergency when others are present. Their findings revealed the powerful influence of diffusion of responsibility and social influence on human behavior. Diffusion of responsibility is the idea that when multiple people are present, the responsibility to act is shared among them. Each individual feels less personal responsibility, assuming that someone else will intervene. This was a key factor in the Genovese case. The witnesses, hearing the screams of their neighbor, likely assumed that someone else had already called the police, or that someone else was better equipped to handle the situation. This diffusion of responsibility created a collective paralysis, a state of inaction that had deadly consequences. Social influence, the other key component of the bystander effect, refers to our tendency to look to others for cues on how to behave in ambiguous situations. In the Genovese case, the witnesses, peering from their windows, saw that none of their neighbors were rushing to help. This sent a powerful, albeit unspoken, message. The situation was not as serious as it seemed, or that intervention was not the appropriate response. This created a vicious cycle of inaction, with each person's passivity reinforcing the passivity of others. The legacy of the Kitty Genovese case also includes a number of positive changes. It led to the development of the 911 emergency call system, which streamlined the process of reporting emergencies and made it easier for people to get help quickly. The case also raised public awareness about the importance of bystander intervention and spurred the creation of Good Samaritan laws, which offer legal protection to those who provide reasonable assistance to those who are injured, ill, in peril, or otherwise incapacitated. However, the story of Kitty Genovese is not just a cautionary tale about the dangers of apathy. It is also a story about the power of narrative and the complexities of memory. The 38 witnesses' story, while powerful, was not entirely accurate. The number was likely inflated, and the idea that all 38 witnesses saw the entire attack from start to finish was a simplification of a much more complex and fragmented series of events. The reality was that most witnesses only heard or saw a small portion of the attack, and their understanding of what was happening was often incomplete and confused. The embellishment of the 38 witnesses' story highlights a common tendency in true crime narratives: the need to create a simple, compelling story with clear heroes and villains. In the Kitty Genovese case, the villains were not just Winston Moseley, but also the 38 silent witnesses. This narrative, while effective in capturing public attention and sparking a national conversation, also did a disservice to the complex reality of the situation. It painted the witnesses with a broad brush, ignoring the nuances of their individual experiences and motivations. The legacy of Kitty Genovese is a complicated one. Her story is a powerful reminder of the importance of individual responsibility and the dangers of collective inaction. It is a story that has been told and retold, in books, films, and television shows, each retelling shaping our understanding of the events of that tragic night. But it is also a story that has been, at times, oversimplified and sensationalized. The truth, as is often the case in true crime, is more complex and more unsettling than the popular narrative would have us believe. The final, thought-provoking question that lingers from the Kitty Genovese case is a deeply personal one. What would you have done? It is easy to judge the witnesses of Kew Gardens from the safety of our own homes, decades removed from the events of that night. It is easy to say that we would have been different, that we would have been the one to call for help. But the psychological principles of the bystander effect suggest that we are all susceptible to the same pressures that led to the inaction of the Kew Gardens residents. The story of Kitty Genovese is a mirror, reflecting our own vulnerabilities and our own capacity for both heroism and indifference. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the line between the hero and the bystander is often much thinner than we would like to believe. It is a story that challenges us to be more aware of our surroundings, to be more willing to get involved, and to remember that in moments of crisis, the actions of a single individual can make the difference between life and death. The chilling reality of the bystander effect is that it is not a phenomenon confined to the past. It is a force that continues to shape our world, playing out in countless situations every day, from online bullying to public acts of violence. The story of Kitty Genovese is as relevant today as it was in 1964, a timeless reminder of the importance of civic courage and the enduring power of a single voice to break through the silence of the crowd. In the end, the story of Kitty Genovese is not just a story about a murder. It is a story about a community, a city, and a nation grappling with a profound moral crisis. It is a story that forced us to look at ourselves and ask some difficult questions about who we are and what we owe to one another. The answers, it seems, are still being debated in courtrooms, in classrooms, and in the quiet moments of our own lives when we are faced with the choice to act or to turn away. The legacy of Kitty Genovese is a powerful one, a story that has been passed down through generations as a cautionary tale. It has become a part of our cultural lexicon, a shorthand for the dangers of urban anonymity and the fragility of community. But it is also a story that has been subject to myth-making and revisionism. The truth of what happened that night in Kew Gardens is a tangled web of fear, confusion, and misinterpretation, a story that is far more complex than the simple narrative of 38 silent witnesses. The bystander effect is a powerful and insidious force, one that can turn ordinary people into passive observers of tragedy. It is a phenomenon that is rooted in our deepest social instincts, our desire to conform, and our fear of standing out from the crowd. The story of Kitty Genovese is a stark reminder of the dangers of succumbing to these instincts, a call to arms for a more engaged and compassionate society. The final, chilling question that the Kitty Genovese case leaves us with is not just about what we would do in a similar situation, but about what we are doing right now to create a world where such a tragedy is less likely to happen. Are we building communities where people feel a sense of responsibility for one another? Are we teaching our children the importance of empathy and courage? Are we creating a society where the default response to a cry for help is not silence, but action? The story of Kitty Genovese is a story without a neat and tidy conclusion. It is a story that continues to haunt us, to challenge us, and to force us to confront the darkest corners of our own human nature. It is a story that reminds us that the fight against indifference is a battle that must be fought every day, in every community, by every one of us. Because in the end, the only thing that can overcome the silence of the crowd is the courage of a single voice, a single act of compassion, a single person who chooses to get involved.